The Forgotten Motel Mystery, the room that erased time. It was supposed to be just another roadside motel, a place travelers passed through, slept, and forgot. But one night, in the outskirts of Nevada, a young man checked into room 19 and never checked out. The manager swore he saw him leave. The maid said the bed was still warm. Police found his wallet, his keys, his half-drunk coffee, but not him. And when investigators tried to enter the room again, something had changed. The dimensions, the light, even the temperature. It was as if the space itself had rewritten reality. This isn't just a disappearance. It's a paradox, a place that swallows time, memory, and everything inside. What if the motel wasn't haunted, but conscious? What if room 19 wasn't a doorway to somewhere, but a doorway between? Welcome to the Forgotten Motel Mystery, where the walls breathe, the lights flicker, and the truth bends like heat on asphalt. If you love unraveling what others fear to ask, subscribe now to Mystery Vault 80. Join our growing circle of seekers who look beyond logic, and walk with us through every unsolved shadow this world has left behind. Like, share, and tell us in the comments. What do you believe waits behind the door of room 19? Because here, every mystery has a voice, and every voice helps us find the next door. A roadside stop that time tried to erase. In the endless stillness of the Arizona desert, time itself seems to hesitate. It was here, on a moonless night in 1992, that a weary traveler named Daniel Mercer checked into the Desert View Motel, a small, fading building nestled against the emptiness. No one remembers the sound of his footsteps as he crossed the gravel lot. No one remembers the color of his car. But everyone remembers what happened next. Daniel took room 15, the one at the far end of the hallway, a room that faced the black horizon. The motel was nearly empty that night, save for a few truckers and a couple on their way to Phoenix. The clerk later said Daniel looked lost, like someone who didn't know which world he belonged to. He asked one odd question before leaving the front desk. "Do you ever feel like this place doesn't end?" That was the last anyone ever heard from him. By morning, his room was sealed from the inside. The bed was untouched. The bathroom light still on. His wallet, keys, and half-finished drink were exactly where he left them. But Daniel Mercer had vanished, as if time itself had folded around him. Investigators searched the area, but there were no footprints leading away, no tire tracks, no sign of life. It was as though the man had stepped out of existence. Locals began calling it the Desert View Mystery. And soon, stories spread that room 15 was built over something ancient, something that swallows people who linger too long between dusk and dawn. Decades later, travelers still say if you stand outside the old motel at night, you can see a flicker of light in room 15's window, a shape moving slowly inside. And if you listen carefully, you can still hear the TV static. If this mystery made your skin crawl, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave your theory in the comments. What do you think happened inside room 15? This is at Mystery Vault 80, where every answer uncovers a deeper question, and every story reminds us that some rooms never let you leave. The door that wouldn't open. When morning came, the sun bled over the desert horizon like fire. Inside room 15, the air conditioner still ran, blowing cold air across an empty bed. By 8 a.m., the motel manager and a housekeeper stood at the door, knocking softly. "Mr. Mercer?" "Sir." No response. When they finally pushed it open, only a few inches the chain latch stopped it. But through that narrow gap, the maid saw something she could never forget. The reflection of the bathroom light flickering, even though the power in that wing had briefly gone out the night before. When the police arrived, they had to use bolt cutters to remove the latch. The door swung open, slow and creaking. The bed was still made. The bathroom empty. But the room felt wrong. Not dirty, not broken, just wrong. Like it had been reset by invisible hands. Detectives noted that the window locks were rusted shut. The vent covers unscrewed easily, but nothing inside. Even the old rotary phone had been disconnected, wires neatly cut. There were no signs of panic. No message written down. Not a single clue to explain how a man could vanish from a locked room in the middle of the desert. Locals soon began whispering that room 15 was cursed. Some claim that years earlier, when the motel was first built, a construction worker had vanished during a storm. His tools found in the same corner where Daniel's suitcase now sat. The sheriff dismissed it all as nonsense. But late that night, when the deputy returned to take photographs, his flashbulb misfired 3 times. When the photos were developed, every frame was blank except one. In that single image, faintly in the reflection of the bathroom mirror, stood a blurred silhouette. Facing the camera, there was no one else in the room. Investigators tried to explain what happened in room 15 through logic and evidence. But as each clue disappeared, one question grew louder. Was this a crime or a breach in reality itself? Echoes from room 15. Within days of Daniel Mercer's disappearance, Desert View Motel became something it was never meant to be, a destination. The kind of lonely roadside stop where truckers once slept off a long haul, now swarmed with reporters, camera vans, and locals whispering over cups of coffee. The sign that once flickered vacancy now glowed faintly like an omen. The case had taken a life of its own. The investigation expands. Detectives from Phoenix joined the local sheriff's office, combing through phone records, bank transactions, and motel logs. Daniel's wallet, found in the room, still held his ID, 2 credit cards, and $84 in cash. None of his accounts were ever touched again. He hadn't withdrawn money before his trip. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. And most importantly, there was no record of him checking out. What baffled investigators further was the timeline. The motel clerk swore he'd seen Daniel alive around 8 p.m., heading back toward his room, carrying a brown paper bag, possibly dinner. By 8:15, another guest claimed to have heard the sound of running water and a faint hum, like a radio playing static. After that, silence. No one reported footsteps. No door opening. No vehicles leaving. Between 8:30 and sunrise, Daniel Mercer simply ceased to exist. The witness accounts. When police canvassed nearby establishments, a diner, a gas station, and a bar, every story seemed to contradict the next. One waitress insisted she'd served Daniel that same night. She remembered because he'd asked if the road to Tucson was open after dark. But another employee at the gas station swore that Daniel came in 2 days earlier, asking for a map of California instead. Surveillance cameras, where available, were either broken, taped over, or rewound by mistake. Every potential lead, corrupted or missing. Even stranger, one guest staying 2 doors down from room 15 told investigators that he'd seen a man in Daniel's clothes walking outside at dawn. When asked how he could be sure, the witness said something odd. Because he wasn't walking. It looked like he was drifting, like a reflection moving across the parking lot. The man refused to speak to police again after that. The motel owner speaks. Under pressure from media, Harold Jennings, the motel's elderly owner, finally gave an interview. He appeared on a small local news segment, sitting stiffly behind the counter. "We've had guests lose luggage, leave in a hurry, even skip out on the bill. But no one's ever disappeared. Not like this." When asked about the locked door, Harold looked uneasy. He said the key Daniel had used was found still in the lock, inside the room. No prints on it. No sign of tampering. And yet, something in his eyes betrayed more than he said. Later, one of the deputies confided that Harold had privately admitted something disturbing. 3 years earlier, another guest had checked into the same room and died by suicide. The room had been closed for months before reopening under a new number, room 15. That detail never made it to the press. The public reacts. As days turned to weeks, the story spread beyond Arizona. Tabloids called it the motel that swallowed a man. Conspiracy forums claimed government cover-ups, alien abductions, or dimensional tears. But the most chilling theory came from someone who'd never met Daniel Mercer, his sister, Evelyn. She appeared in an emotional TV interview, holding her brother's photograph. Her voice cracked as she said, "Daniel was tired. He told me he felt watched. He said there was something about that place, that he'd been there before, even though he hadn't." That statement sent investigators back to square one. Had Daniel been suffering from paranoia? Or had he sensed something none of them could explain? The case grows cold. By the 3rd week, evidence dried up. No ransom. No credit card activity. No body. The file was quietly labeled Unsolved, Open Status. Detectives moved on. But for those who had stepped into room 15, police, cleaners, journalists, one thing remained constant. That feeling of being watched. The low hum in the air, like electricity under the skin. Even after the room was sealed and repainted, guests who stayed next door claimed they could hear tapping, rhythmic, patient, from the other side of the wall. The investigation might have ended, but the motel hadn't forgotten. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. It lingers, waiting for someone else to check in. The motel's dark ledger. The Desert View Motel had stood on the edge of Interstate 17 since 1963, a cheap rest stop for travelers headed toward Phoenix or Flagstaff. Its faded turquoise paint and flickering neon sign were relics of an older America. But behind its peeling walls, the motel carried a quiet history, one that investigators would soon uncover, piece by unsettling piece. A trail of tragedies. When Detective Alvarez began digging through property records, she noticed something odd. The Desert View Motel had changed ownership 5 times in 30 years. Each sale followed an incident, a violent death, a sudden disappearance, or a financial collapse. 1965, a newlywed couple checks in for their honeymoon. The next morning, the husband is found dead from an apparent overdose. 1974, a trucker disappears mid-route, his rig found parked behind the building, engine still running. 1989, a transient dies of exposure in one of the rooms after claiming he was being chased by shadows. And then, 1992, Daniel Mercer. 4 cases, same property, same section of the building, all of them centered around the north wing. The one that ended in room 15. An old maintenance log. When police went through storage after Harold Jennings, the owner, passed away in 1997, they found a series of handwritten notes in a metal filing box labeled repairs. Among routine entries about plumbing and light bulbs was one cryptic message dated August 15, 1989. Room 15, sound coming from walls again. Guests complained about whispering. Told him it was the pipes. He didn't believe me. And below that, written in a different pen, possibly years later, do not rent this room again. Ever. Yet it was rented again, under a new number after the suicide case in 1989. And that's how Daniel Mercer ended up there. Locals remember. In interviews with nearby residents, a chilling pattern emerges. The motel's older regulars, truckers, long-haul drivers, and traveling salesmen, recalled a strange superstition. You never take the north wing, one retired driver told a reporter. Not if you want to wake up. Another said he once spent a night there in the early 80s and awoke to find all his belongings rearranged, folded and stacked neatly in the middle of the room. He left before dawn and never came back. Even the motel's cleaning staff spoke of unease. Several workers quit abruptly, claiming they heard voices through the vents, soft, overlapping whispers calling their names. One maid, interviewed in 1993, described hearing laughter inside an unoccupied room. It wasn't the TV. It was lower, closer, like it was in the wall. Architectural anomaly. In 1994, a private investigator hired by the Mercer family commissioned a structural survey. When engineers examined the motel's blueprints, they discovered something deeply unsettling. There was no official record of Room 15's foundation. According to county records, the north wing should have ended at Room 14. Room 15 was added later, without permit, inspection, or electrical approval. Its wiring was irregular, the walls slightly thicker than standard, as if something else existed between them. When the investigator tried to drill a small inspection hole, the drill bit snapped, striking what seemed to be a hollow metal surface behind the plaster. He returned the next morning to find the hole patched and painted over. The motel owner claimed he didn't know who did it. After that, the investigator quit the case. Patterns in the vanishings. By the mid-2000s, internet sleuths began to piece together the motel's strange chronology. Each time a disappearance occurred, the motel had just reopened after renovation or change of ownership. Each time, The vanished guest had checked into the same section. Each time, they had stayed alone. And in every case, their personal effects, wallet, watch, keys, were found perfectly arranged on the bedside table. Almost as if someone or something didn't want them to be forgotten, just gone. The motel's last days. In 2001, the Desert View Motel shut down after a fire gutted part of the north wing. The official cause was listed as faulty wiring, but firefighters who entered the site reported something stranger. All the damage centered in one room, room 15. The fire burned hot enough to melt the hinges off the door, but left the rest of the building untouched. Since then, the structure has stood abandoned. Locals say if you drive past at night, the neon vacancy sign still flickers, powered by nothing but the desert wind. The motel's history reads like a warning written in ash, one that no one wanted to see. But some stories don't stay locked in a file. They whisper, they wait, and sometimes they call someone back. Echoes of the desert. The Desert View Motel had been abandoned for more than 20 years. The windows were boarded up, the paint had peeled down to gray wood, and a tumbleweed had taken residence in the empty parking lot. Most locals refused to go near it, not out of superstition, but out of something harder to define, respect for what was lost there. But in the age of the internet, nothing truly stays buried. The Urban Explorer. In 2018, a YouTube urban explorer known as Desert Phantom uploaded a video titled, "Exploring Arizona's Most Haunted Motel. What I Found Will Shock You." The video began like thousands of others, shaky flashlight footage, a heavy desert breeze, and a voice speaking half in jest. But what the camera captured inside room 15 turned a forgotten cold case into a new national obsession. As Desert Phantom Pride opened the rusted door, his light caught something glinting in the dust. A silver wristwatch, its face cracked but still legible. The engraving on the back read, "To Daniel, keep time close." It was identical to the one Daniel Mercer's family had described in the police report, except Mercer's watch had already been logged into evidence in 1993. So whose was this? The video that vanished. Within hours of upload, the video gained over 2 million views. Viewers were fascinated. The watch, the strange noises in the background, the final seconds of the recording where the camera jerks violently and Desert Phantom whispers, "Who's there?" Then, black screen. Less than 24 hours later, the video disappeared. The channel was wiped clean, and the user, Desert Phantom, was never heard from again. Attempts to contact him through his business email bounced back. Fellow explorers claimed he'd been planning another trip to Arizona, but never showed. Police reports say no missing person file was ever opened under his real name. Just like Daniel Mercer, he too had vanished into the motel story. Digital detectives, online forums lit up overnight. Cold case enthusiasts, paranormal investigators, and conspiracy theorists flooded Reddit, 4chan, and YouTube comment sections. They began connecting dots between the 1992 disappearance, the fire in 2001, and the resurfaced watch. Some believe the watch proved a cover-up, suggesting the motel was used as an off-the-record safe house for police or criminal operations in the 80s. Others argued that the watch was a message planted by someone trying to reopen the case. But a smaller, quieter group online noticed something else. In the reflection of a cracked bathroom mirror from the explorer's footage, there appeared a faint outline of another figure standing behind him. A blurred, tall shadow, partially illuminated by the flashlight beam. It didn't move. It didn't flinch. And when viewers slowed the footage down frame by frame, the shadow wasn't in front of the wall, it was inside it. Forensic re-examination. Months later, local authorities, pressured by renewed media attention, reopened the Mercer case. A new forensic team entered the property, this time with modern scanning equipment. They used ground-penetrating radar to map the structure's interior. And what they found froze the investigation cold. A void, a hollow chamber, roughly 2 feet thick, running along the wall between rooms 14 and 15. The chamber was sealed, but inside it, the radar detected irregular shapes, metallic objects, possibly organic material. A motion sensor briefly flickered, and then went dead. When police returned 2 days later to cut through the wall, the chamber was empty. Completely empty. Only a thin layer of white dust remained, like fine ash. And carved faintly into the plaster, they found a single word. Stay. The motel's second death. After that night, the investigation abruptly halted. The motel was demolished within weeks under the guise of safety violations. Every brick, every wall gone, except for the foundation of room 15, which the demolition crew said was impossible to break. The machinery seized. The concrete split but wouldn't yield. They eventually buried it under new asphalt, calling it a lost cause. Today, a rest stop and gas station stand over the site. But truckers say if you park there late at night and leave your car engine off, you can still hear the faint hum of an old neon sign. And if you listen closer, a soft, rhythmic knock from underneath the ground. The motel was gone, the investigation silenced, but the story refused to rest. Some say the dead leave traces behind. Others say the lost never really leave at all. And for those who go looking for answers in the desert sometimes looks back. The pattern beneath the sand. The demolition of the Desert View Motel was supposed to be the end. Another case closed by circumstance. Another story buried under asphalt. But the desert doesn't bury things. It preserves them. And soon, other names began to resurface. The connection nobody saw. When a reopened case files went public, retired detective Frank Laramie, who had worked Mercer's disappearance in 1992, noticed something strange. Buried deep in the archives was a cross-reference note, a name scrawled in the margin of a different case file from 1985. See, Desert View Motel, similarities to Ridgeway Lodge. The Ridgeway Lodge case involved another missing traveler, Anna Ruiz, a 27-year-old nurse who vanished overnight while en route from Phoenix to El Paso. Her car was found parked at the Ridgeway Lodge. Her room key was on the nightstand. The bed was made, and her suitcase was untouched. The case went nowhere. But Laramie saw what others hadn't. Both motels had the same owner, a reclusive businessman named Gerald Dunn, who operated a string of roadside inns across the Southwest between 1975 and 1994. Every one of them located in desolate stretches of desert, away from the main highways. 5 motels, 7 recorded disappearances, 0 convictions. The motel chain from nowhere. On paper, Dunn's business looked legitimate. He paid taxes, filed annual reports, and appeared in a handful of tourism ads. But when a journalist named Caroline Vega started tracing his business registrations, something impossible emerged. Dunn's social security number appeared to have been issued twice, once in Arizona and again in New Mexico, 3 years apart. The addresses listed on his corporate filings didn't exist anymore. One was now a cemetery, and the photographs of Dunn that surfaced in local archives, none of them matched. Different heights, different hair colors, different men, all using the same name. Whoever Gerald Dunn was, there may have been more than one. Patterns in the blueprint. When Vega overlaid the locations of Dunn's motels on a map, she found something that didn't feel like coincidence. The 5 sites, Desert View, Ridgeway Lodge, Sand Hollow Inn, Mesa Pines Motel, and the Hollow Creek Stopover, formed a near-perfect pentagon. At its center lay a patch of government land, an abandoned meteorological research station, decommissioned in the early 80s. Satellite images showed faint geometric patterns in the sand, as though something had once been buried there and later removed. Locals told stories of strange humming noises, flickering lights, and military trucks that visited the area under cover of night. None of it ever made the news. The missing reports. In 1993, shortly after Mercer vanished, a batch of police records related to the Ridgeway Lodge case disappeared from county storage. Officially, the loss was blamed on water damage. But in a leaked internal memo from that same year, a police archivist wrote, "Not water, fire." Inside the file room, everything else untouched. Among the burned files was an evidence photo labeled Interior, Room 7 from the Ridgeway Lodge. The partially legible log line read, "Similar wall markings to Desert View, chalk residue, untranslatable symbols." Those words never made it into the public record. A A survivor speaks. Then came a revelation no one expected. In 2019, a 62-year-old truck driver named Howard Red Callum contacted Vega anonymously. He claimed he had once worked maintenance for Gerald Dunn's company at the Mesa Pines Motel in New Mexico. When asked why he was reaching out after 3 decades, Callum said, "Because I finally saw that watch." He described being called to fix electrical issues in certain rooms that guests weren't supposed to rent. Rooms with sealed vents, double locks, and recording equipment hidden behind mirrors. Once, he said, he entered one of those rooms by mistake. There was no bed, just a single metal chair bolted to the floor. And on the far wall, written in faint white paint, were 3 words. "Don't turn around." Callum quit the next day. Within a week, the Mesa Pines Motel caught fire. The Silent Company. Further digging revealed that Dunn's motel chain was financed by a shell corporation, Solterra Holdings, which dissolved in 1995. The company's tax records were sealed under national security exemptions. No one knew why, but a line from one of Vega's interviews with Callum stood out. "Whatever they were doing in those rooms, they didn't want people to see. But I swear, sometimes you could hear things people talking behind the walls. Not in the next room, inside them. The Shadow Network." At this point in the film, the tone tightens. The viewer begins to feel that the motel wasn't an isolated event. It was part of something much wider, a system, maybe even an experiment, stretching across years and borders. Could the missing guests have been part of some clandestine operation? Were they victims of a traveling predator or subjects in something darker, something institutional? The pattern was forming, but no one could yet say what it meant. The deeper investigators looked, the more invisible hands seemed to pull the strings. Motels vanished, records burned, witnesses recanted, and one chilling truth began to emerge. Room 15 may have been only one of many. But some doors, once opened, refused to close again. The company that never existed. The trail of Solterra Holdings should have ended in the mid-1990s, dissolved, forgotten, and name lost to bureaucracy. But as journalist Caroline Vega dug deeper, she uncovered a trail that refused to die. There were no offices, no phone numbers, no CEO photographs. Yet somehow, Solterra had signed contracts, paid salaries, and received federal research grant from agencies that officially denied knowing who they were. And on every document, hidden in the fine print, was one signature, Gerald Dunn. Or, at least, the name pretending to be him. The funding ghost. Through Freedom of Information requests, Vega obtained fragments of Solterra's old bank records. Each wire transfer came from a different city: Dallas, Denver, Phoenix, Salt Lake. All funneled into a single account registered under Research Infrastructure Maintenance. A fake department, a fake purpose, but a real amount. Over $1.4 million in untraceable funds. When Vega cross-referenced those cities with Dunn's motel sites, the locations matched exactly. The money trail wasn't random. It was circular. Every dollar disappeared where a motel did. The government connection. Enter Dr. Alan Ridge, a retired engineer who once worked at the U.S. Department of Energy in the early 80s. When shown Solterra's letterhead, Ridge froze. He claimed it matched the style used by subcontractors working under Project Echo Mirage, a short-lived, classified program focused on neurological environmental studies. In simpler terms, experiments studying how isolation, sound, and environment affect human perception. Ridge said the program was shut down after multiple psychological breakdowns among volunteers. But if Solterra was a front for that project, the shutdown might have been only on paper. Sometimes, Ridge admitted, the research doesn't end. It just changes its name. The Whispering Walls. To test this theory, Vega and her cameraman returned to the Desert View Motel demolition site. Using ground-penetrating radar, they scanned beneath the area where Room 15 once stood. What they found wasn't a body, but a foundation cavity, sealed with industrial concrete. Within it were remnants of electrical wiring, soundproof panels, and what appeared to be acoustic dampening material. Far too advanced for a 1992 roadside motel. Experts later confirmed it resembled equipment used in sensory deprivation research. What was it doing inside a motel room? And who had been the subject? The audio file. Weeks later, Vega received an unmarked envelope containing a cassette tape labeled Only. Mesa Pines, 1988, Test 04. The tape was degraded, the audio faint, but after digital restoration, a few sentences could be made out. A man's voice asked, "Can you describe what you're seeing now?" A woman replied, weak and trembling, "There's a door, but it's inside the wall. I can hear it breathing." Then silence. A faint hum followed, the same tone frequency detected at the Desert View site. When the team tried to trace the tape's origin, the post office had no record of its delivery. The envelope, they said, wasn't supposed to exist. Erased identities. Soon after the story aired online, Vega's accounts were hacked. Files vanished. Audio backups corrupted. Her primary source, Howard "Red" Callum, went missing from his truck stop residence. Police listed it as a voluntary departure, but his belongings, wallet, truck keys, medications, were still inside his vehicle. Vega received one final message before disconnecting from public view. A short, anonymous text. "Stop looking for the room. The room looks for you." The network of silence. By 2020, the Solterra investigation had become a labyrinth, a web of burned documents, false identities, and invisible threats. Every motel connected to a missing person. Every missing person linked to a government study. Every record ending with the same three initials, EMD. What did it stand for? No one knew. But one archivist, before being reassigned, claimed those letters appeared once before inside classified Cold War documents involving psychological field testing on unknowing civilians. The journalist vanishes. Then, it happened again. In 2021, Caroline Vega herself disappeared. Last seen leaving her apartment in Tucson, on her way to meet a former Solterra accountant. She never arrived. Her phone was found the next morning on a park bench. Its last video recording showed a static-filled frame, Vega whispering. If you're watching this, it's because they don't want this story told. Then a flicker, a shape in the background, a door faintly glowing in the middle of the sand. The deeper the investigation went, the more it felt like the truth itself was dissolving. Motels erased. Witnesses missing. But one final trail remained, the coordinates on Vega's notepad. A destination marked with a single word, origin. The origin point. When journalist Caroline Vega vanished, it felt like the investigation had died with her. Her files were scrubbed. Her email servers gone. Her family received no ransom note, no leads. Only a call from an unknown federal contact suggesting she had relocated for safety. But her notebook survived. One torn, water-stained page left behind on her desk. At the top, in her handwriting, just one word, origin. And beneath it, a set of coordinates. The numbers led straight to a patch of barren land 20 miles north of Rhyolite, Nevada, a ghost town once used for military testing in the 1950s. The journey to the desert. A new investigative team took up Vega's trail. Independent filmmaker Sam Ortiz and researcher Lydia Merrow, who had followed Vega's work since her Solterra expose. With cameras, a drone, and 2 backup vehicles, they arrived at the coordinates at dawn. There was nothing, no buildings, no roads, not even tire marks. Just sand, sagebrush, and a low hum in the air. A frequency so constant that their recording equipment began to flicker. Then Lydia noticed it. A small concrete foundation, half buried under decades of dust. Stamped on one corner were faint letters. Eschar, 1973. When cross-referenced later, that code matched one of the first Solterra Holdings construction permits ever issued. The hidden chamber. They began to dig, clearing sand with shovels in their bare hands. After hours of work, Ortiz's spade struck metal. A square hatch welded shut, bolted on from the outside. A faint marking, carved by hand, read, Room 0. They broke the seal and lowered a camera inside. What they found didn't belong to a motel. It looked like a testing chamber. The walls were covered in dull gray padding. A single metal bed frame bolted to the floor, and etched into the plaster above it, barely visible. I didn't check out. echoes in the static. As Ortiz's team explored, their microphones began picking up interference, bursts of faint whispers mixed with mechanical tones. At first, they assumed radio bleed from aircraft above, but the voices weren't in English or any identifiable language. Audio analysts later determined the sounds were composed of inverted phonemes, essentially reverse speech. When digitally flipped, the fragments formed words that chilled even the skeptics. They watched through the walls. "We are still here. Check-in never ends." The sound file timestamp matched the hour Vega disappeared. The forgotten guests. Further inside the structure, Ortiz's team discovered a rusted locker filled with abandoned personal effects. A leather purse containing a hospital visitor's ID from St. Luke's, 1993, a motel room key for Mesa Pines, labeled Room 14, and a photograph of a young woman sitting on a motel bed, smiling at the camera. On the back, scribbled in fading ink, "If you find me, tell him I'm awake now." Facial recognition linked the image to Marissa Lang, one of the early victims listed in Vega's report, missing since 1989. The map within. Hidden behind one of the chamber walls was a rolled canvas, sealed in wax. When unrolled, it revealed a rough map, not of roads, but of light sources. Clusters of dots connected by faint lines, forming what appeared to be a network. Each cluster corresponded to a motel site previously linked to Solterra Holdings. But one point stood alone, far from any known town, labeled only the Origin Room. Lydia theorized it wasn't a physical place, but an experiment, the first test location for whatever Solterra had been studying. She circled it in red, whispering, "Every disappearance began here." Government shadows. 2 days later, Ortiz received a cease and desist order, unsigned, delivered by courier. The letter stated that the material they retrieved contained restricted data under federal confidentiality statutes. Hours after that, their online footage vanished, accounts deleted, servers wiped. Their backup drives, kept in a hotel safe, were found melted from an internal short circuit. Ortiz called it a warning, disguised as a coincidence. But Lydia wasn't ready to stop. She returned to the site one final time with a handheld camera. The footage, never aired publicly, was recovered months later by a data retrieval team. In the last few seconds, Lydia's voice is heard saying, "The air feels heavier. It's like the walls are listening again." Then static, a faint shimmer in the distance, as if heat waves were forming a doorway. And then she was gone. The cycle restarts. Ortiz fled the country soon after, releasing one final statement online. "Every motel, every case, they're not separate disappearances. They're rehearsals. Whoever built those rooms was practicing for something bigger." As Ortiz vanished from the public eye, the final fragments of a story began surfacing from unlikely places: declassified files, hidden correspondences, and a witness who claimed to have worked on the Origin project itself. A man who said he could prove the truth, if he lived long enough to tell it. The insider's confession. When the world began to forget the story, one man refused to stay silent. His name was Richard Hale, a retired structural engineer, once employed under a government-contracted company that handled specialized architecture projects during the 1970s and 80s. For decades, he stayed quiet, bound by confidentiality agreements and fear. But in 2015, at 83 years old, Hale sent a cryptic message to an investigative podcast host. "You're looking in the right direction, but at the wrong floor." He insisted on meeting off the record in a diner outside of Tucson, Arizona. The host recorded everything. That conversation, later leaked and verified, changed how investigators viewed every unexplained disappearance linked to Solterra Holdings, the project that shouldn't exist. According to Hale, the motel was never meant to host travelers. It was a containment site, one of many across the U.S. built during the Cold War to study human isolation under sensory distortion. The program was allegedly called Project Mirage. Its goal: to understand how long the mind could function when reality itself became unstable. Participants were told they were in a psychological endurance experiment. But Hale claimed the project quickly spiraled into something darker. They stopped sending in test subjects, he said. They started keeping them. He described reinforced concrete rooms lined with lead sheeting, walls that could muffle thought, as he put it. Each room had cameras, not just to watch the subjects, but to record how space itself behaved over time. The experiments. Hale confessed that engineers noticed strange readings, gravitational distortions, subtle bends in light, time-lapse inconsistencies in the footage. At first, they thought it was equipment failure. Then one subject, identified only as Test 11B, vanished in real time. The camera didn't glitch. She simply stood up, walked toward the far wall, and kept walking right through it. Hale paused during the interview and whispered. The wall absorbed her like mist swallowing a shadow. Within a week, all records of Test 11B were deleted. Supervisors ordered the staff to seal the room and move on. But Hale said the rooms began to hum, as though alive. Every new chamber we built sounded like it was breathing. The official cover-up. Hale said Solterra Holdings wasn't a private company at all. It was a subsidiary shell used by defense research agencies. When the disappearances began to draw attention, Solterra's name quietly vanished from all public records. The motels built under their contracts were sold off, one by one, and reopened as cheap roadside lodgings. It was camouflage, Hale explained. A perfect cover. Nobody questions what happens in a motel room. People check in and out all the time. But Hale hinted that the vanishing rooms weren't isolated incidents. Each location shared identical design blueprints, room dimensions, wall materials, wiring patterns, and even art placement. It was as if they were recreating the same structure again and again, hoping to trigger whatever phenomenon they'd stumbled upon. The witness protection of the damned. Hale tried to leave the project in 1979, but 2 agents visited his home days later. They told him he'd seen too much to retire. His pension was approved on one condition: silence. Still, he kept copies of his blueprints and journals, hidden inside a hollow section of his workshop wall. Those documents, released posthumously by his family, revealed diagrams eerily similar to the buried structure Ortiz found decades later. One file was labeled Phase 0, Pity Unit. At the bottom of the document was a note. First European Test Site Operational, Paris, 1971. That line connected the vanishing room in France to every later Solterra disappearance, from Nevada to Texas and beyond. The confession ends. At the end of the leaked recording, Hale's voice grew shaky. He said something that haunted the podcast host for months. They thought they were building walls to keep people in, but those walls were doors, and whatever walked through wanted company. 2 weeks after the recording aired, Richard Hale was found dead in his home. The cause was ruled heart failure, but no autopsy was performed. His workshop was destroyed in an unexplained electrical fire. All the backup drives with his files melted as if by an intense heat from within. The ripple effect. Hale's confession reignited public interest in the Solterra mystery. Online forums began tracking old motel blueprints, uncovering eerie similarities in layout and decor. Urban explorers reported hearing low-frequency hums in certain abandoned buildings, sounds only detectable on specialized microphones. And in one case, a tourist in Arizona claimed she heard whispers through the walls of an old motel bathroom. When she pressed her ear against the tile, she said she could make out a woman's voice. Don't let them build another room. The bathroom was sealed the next day. The last room. As Hale's warnings echoed across digital archives, a final question emerged. If every room was connected, where did they lead? Was there truly an origin room, the first of them all, hidden somewhere beneath miles of sand and concrete? Ortiz's team was determined to find out, no matter the cost. Their next destination would take them deep underground, to a structure never listed on any map. The final chapter begins there, in the darkness, where silence hums and the walls breathe again. The last room. The desert was quiet that morning, unnervingly quiet. The air was still, heavy, and dry, as if the earth itself held its breath. Dr. Elena Ortiz and her team stood at the edge of what appeared to be nothing more than a collapsed service tunnel, a scar of concrete and sand miles away from the nearest road. But beneath their feet lay something no one was meant to find. Weeks of decoding Richard Hale's blueprints had led them here, a buried substructure beneath an abandoned motel site, long erased from property records. The final coordinate matched perfectly. According to Hale's files, this was Phase 0, the first of all the vanishing rooms. Ortiz turned to the camera operator, her voice barely a whisper. "We're standing on top of the original. The descent." The team drilled through the first barrier, 3 feet of reinforced concrete. Behind it lay an air pocket, then a narrow maintenance shaft. When they broke through the final layer, a gust of cold, metallic air escaped, a smell like burnt ozone and rust. As they descended, lights flickered on their helmets, illuminating walls etched with faint markings. The deeper they went, the quieter everything became. Even the static on their radios cut out. No wind, no echo, only the steady drip of unseen condensation. Then they reached it, a single unmarked steel door, sealed shut but perfectly intact despite decades underground. On its surface, someone had scratched 2 words into the paint. "Still here." Ortiz hesitated. "We've come this far," she said, her hand trembling as she touched the latch. The door opened with a soft hiss. Inside the chamber, at first, the room appeared empty, just a square of concrete lit by their flashlights. But as their eyes adjusted, they noticed strange distortions in the air, like heat waves but cold. The walls seemed to pulse, faintly, like the rhythm of slow heartbeat. One of the crew stepped forward and gasped. His reflection in the wall wasn't his own. It was that of another man, wearing 1970s clothing, staring back with hollow eyes. The reflection mouthed something, but there was no sound. Then the temperature plummeted. Their breath turned white. The camera lens fogged. Every piece of metal, watches, radios, zippers, began vibrating softly. Ortiz whispered into the recorder, "The readings are impossible. It's like the space itself is folding." The air shimmered again. And then, faintly, voices. Dozens of them. Men, women, even children. All speaking over one another in hushed tones, as if murmuring from behind the walls. The footage that shouldn't exist. Back at base, the recovered footage showed something that no one on site had noticed in real time. As Ortiz and her team explored the chamber, figures flickered into view. Faint silhouettes, transparent, standing perfectly still in the corners of the room. The timestamp glitched repeatedly, jumping between 1971 and 2023. For 10 seconds, the camera recorded 2 realities at once. In one, the team stood in modern gear. In the other, men in 1970s uniforms stood in identical positions, their faces identical to the missing Solterra test subjects. Then the footage ended. The camera shut off on its own. The team's audio resumed 2 hours later with the sound of distant footsteps and Ortiz shouting for help. They made it out alive, but the memory cards from every other camera were corrupted, melted from within. The final revelation. Back at the university, Ortiz studied the surviving data. She discovered a repeating signal in the background noise, an encrypted frequency embedded in the hum of the chamber itself. After days of decoding, she realized it wasn't random. It was Morse code. The message repeated endlessly. "Don't open another." If Hale's confession was true, Solterra had built more than one of these vanishing rooms. And if this was the first, the rest were still out there, sealed, hidden beneath ordinary structures across the world. Ortiz submitted her findings to multiple agencies. Days later, she received a call warning her to stop before the walls close in. When investigators checked her lab a week later, she was gone, her office untouched, her laptop still running a file titled "Doorways Between Us." Echoes of the past. Locals say the old motel site remains deserted. Satellite imaging shows a faint thermal signature underground, pulsing every few hours like a heartbeat. Geologists who visited reported compasses spinning wildly and digital watches freezing at 3:03 a.m., the same timestamp from Ortiz's final recording. Urban explorers who tried to enter the tunnel vanished without trace. Authorities sealed the area permanently, citing ground instability. But those who live nearby claim that on windless nights, you can still hear faint knocking beneath the ground. 3 knocks, then silence, then a whisper. We never left. Was this the final truth? A government experiment gone wrong? Or something far older that science accidentally disturbed? The vanishing room remains a legend whispered among researchers, soldiers, and conspiracy theorists alike. A story that proves some doors are meant to stay closed, even when we're dying to know what's on the other side. Because sometimes what disappears doesn't want to be found. And sometimes the walls remember. The unraveling truth. As the investigation pushes deeper, hidden inconsistencies finally surface. A janitor recalls being told never to enter the vanished room after midnight. A nurse admits certain sections of the hospital were off-limits, not because of repairs, but because of someone powerful behind closed doors. And an old maintenance log, yellowed and brittle, lists an entry dated 1 day after the disappearance, describing repairs to an internal wall, a wall that wasn't supposed to exist. Suddenly, it all makes sense. The vanished patient, the erased records, the silent staff. Every thread leads to the same place, a cover-up built brick by brick. Whether to hide a crime, a scandal, or something the world wasn't ready to see, the truth was buried, literally, inside the hospital itself. But the deeper we dig, the more dangerous it feels. Because sometimes the truth isn't hidden, it's protected. Someone or something still doesn't want this story told. Echoes that remain. Decades later, people still whisper about the vanishing room. Or in the Motel version, about room 19, where no one checks in twice. Renovations changed the structure, walls were knocked down, numbers repainted, but somehow visitors still feel it. That sudden chill, the flicker in the lights, the sense of being watched from inside the walls. Families of the missing never found closure. Official reports were sealed. And yet, from Paris to Nevada, stories persist. Of echoes, of dreams, of people who swear they heard voices calling their names in the dark. The mystery outlived the investigators, the doctors, even the building itself. Because some stories never die. They linger, waiting for someone brave enough to open the door again. And that is where we leave it. For now, no one stays at that motel anymore. The building stands empty, its sign rusted, its rooms stripped bare. Yet, sometimes, travelers report seeing a light flicker from room 19. No electricity, no guests, just that one silent glow. Maybe it's a reflection, or maybe it's a memory, repeating itself. In the end, mysteries like this remind us, the world isn't fully mapped. There are still places that don't want to be found. Stories that exist only in the spaces between fact and faith. But that's why we're here. To ask the questions others won't. To follow the trails that end in the dark. If you believe the unknown still matters, then subscribe now to Mystery Vault 80. Every like, every share, every comment you leave fuels the search for answers others abandoned. You're not just a viewer here. You're part of the investigation. So, join us again next time. The next mystery is already unfolding. And this time, it might be closer than you think.